You're listening to A Creative Excuse presented by Echo Amano. I'm Frank Rose.
And I'm Cara Duvall. This episode is with Terran Last Gun. We recorded our first episode with Terran more than 6 years ago. Go back and listen to that episode for more information on his background as we talk more about what's going on now in this episode.
We just had Terran's solo show at Echo back in March, and he has work concluded in the 12th Site Santa Fe International opening June 27th. You can view his work on our website at echoamano.org and on his at terranlastgun.com.
Our next openings are on July 4th with Zara Marwan and a group show of 30 bolo ties made by 30 artists called Everybody's Bolos. Learn more about these shows at echoamano.org/exhibitions.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, that's...
Oh my God.
My grandparents always had that, so I just kind of stuck with it. And...
Oh, Frank and I, when we were youngins, we drank chock full of nuts. Did you ever? No? Okay. It's in a can, and I'm sure it's got crazy amounts of caffeine in it. I can just get wired on it. But those days are gone. Now it's like matcha. Yeah, matcha.
I'm still on the coffee.
Frank is on the coffee.
Yeah, I kind of go a little bougie on the coffee. There's a company in Albuquerque that delivers, and it's like a free delivery. So like they do their own roasting and they deliver, and it's like, in terms of like bougie coffee, it's pretty affordable. It's like $15 a pound. It's like, I mean, you can go to Better Day and get like a $20 8 ounce, you know.
Yeah.
So, cool.
Yeah.
We did this like 6 years ago.
Yeah, 2019.
It's crazy.
I was just checking it out.
I listened to it the other day, and it was a trip to just kind of like hear where both of us were at.
Exactly.
You know, and just kind of getting warmed up, really, you know. I mean, it's, you know, we're both in very different spots now. It's so cool to kind of like reflect and like see where that's gotten.
Totally.
You know, one of the things that I wanted to talk about was kind of just that, was like how, I mean, to me, to my eyes, like just how much you're doing is kind of insane to me. Like this year you've had 4 solo shows. You've been in 2 art fairs, and like you've got like 2 museum solo shows coming up. Like, what's going on? Like, how do you do this? Where does this come from? Where is this bubbling up from?
Well, I've always just naturally been an artist who likes to take on projects. Yeah. So I assume we're starting?
We're starting.
Let's start.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. If you want the introduction, listen to the episode from 6 years ago, and you'll get all of Terran's backstory.
Yes. No, like I was saying earlier, I was just listening to that, and it's so crazy just to hear where I was at that time, what I was focusing on, medium-wise, ideas just pre-pandemic, and thinking about post-pandemic now, and surviving, I guess. Maybe I feel everything after the pandemic kind of changed, and the way I approached being an artist, and I kind of just had to hustle and work harder, and maybe that's where I started taking on projects. Yeah. And I think, you know, as an artist, we like to say yes to opportunities. So I've been in that phase for a bit, but now I'm in more of I'm trying to be more of refining that down, and working with people who really want to take my work and share it, you know, with the world, and invest, basically, like partnerships. So that's what I'm really interested in, after working with so many galleries over the last since 2020. That's one thing I've learned is, you know, I gravitate towards people who actually want to invest in your career and really make it a partnership.
Yeah. Actually have a deep relationship. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because you're spending so much time doing your work. I mean, it's like, and for me, I feel the same way. It's like so much of, you know, everybody's time is spent like, okay, how do we make a living in the world? Like, I don't want it to just be like rote and mechanical. Like, I want it to like have a lot of meaning, and like, okay, if this is the way that we have to sort of make our way through the world, like, let's make it meaningful. Let's like build something and like have real relationships with it.
Yeah.
So that's awesome.
Have it be regenerative. And if you're going to have to hustle, at least have fun while you're doing it, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think one of the cool things that I was recognizing was back then you were talking about like one of the goals is being able to show your work in your community up in Montana. And like that's really happened a lot.
Yes, yeah.
That's so cool.
No, the first show I had was at the Museum of the Plains Indian, which is right in my hometown. And it's managed by the Department of Interior, so it's a more of a federal type collection, historic collection too. So it was really nice to see my more contemporary work right next to these historic works from my same nation, Piikani people, and it was ledger drawing too. So that's something that has changed since the first podcast. Is I'm doing more ledger drawings, and it's on these old documents, antique papers from the early 1900s, late 1800s sometimes. And so to see that next to all these old works was really a special moment for me. And of course, having my family there and community. So that was one of the first shows in Montana. And then I got a solo show at the Missoula Art Museum in Missoula, Montana. That was a really great opportunity. And then after that, just last year was at the Hockaday Museum of Art, which is now known as Glacier Art Museum. That was last year, and in Kalispell, Montana. And so different museum shows in Montana have, that's been really nice because it's closer to my community. My family can come out. If they can make it, it's a lot closer. So
yeah. And you just got back from Good Luck Gallery. That's in Kalispell?
That's in Kalispell too. So that kind of, from the Hockaday branched off into that. And it's a smaller gallery space. Kalispell is, it's probably the same size as Santa Fe, maybe smaller, but it's the fastest growing city in Montana right now.
Whoa.
Just so many people are moving over there. It's expanded so much. It's crazy. And for them to have a gallery space like Good Luck, this contemporary art space, in such a Western, because the art in Montana is very Western, I see. And so being able to show in a space that's more contemporary is nice.
Yeah, totally. As you've kind of gone in sort of volume and in scope and scale, I really feel like, you've been continually like refining your work. There's a through line. Like I feel like you can look at what you were doing in 2019 and now and still see you in the work. I mean, I think you've always been very present in the work. In what ways would you say that it has changed, if you can kind of mark anything?
Yeah, no, my background is in printmaking.
Yeah.
And so that's what I have shown with the gallery, a lot in the beginning was prints, and that visual vocabulary definitely I brought over into my current practice, which is ledger drawing. And that I started ledger drawing in 2020. And really, I'm using colored pencils. So my favorite colored pencil brand is Holbein, which is this Japanese colored pencil. It's very velvety and soft. And then Faber-Castell, which is a German colored pencil. Those are the top two I use. And then sometimes Pablo, but the first two I use a lot of. And so working with colored pencils and working with ledger drawing and thinking about it has really expanded my color theory and thinking about how colors interact with each other, because I have control over a specific color, this colored pencil. And so my color theory has really expanded how I think about selection and just color interaction. And then shapes, I've really dived deeper into color and shape, looking at shape. How do you describe these shapes? So I've worked a lot with four-sided shapes, polygons, trapezoids, irregular trapezoids, and then I've slowly expanded on those and adding more sides to the shapes, but very geometric still. The work is still geometric, which will always be inspired by the painted lodges. And it's become maybe more minimal. There's more minimal qualities to the work. And of course, now I'm thinking about scale. So I'm combining sheets of paper, creating diptychs, triptychs, and quadriptychs. I think after that, it becomes a suite. But so I'm in all of those ranges right now and working with the gallery to do the TIA collection commission, a suite of 8 drawings, ledger drawings. That was sort of the start of that going larger, and of course leading up to the site Santa Fe 12th International, which is opening soon. I've done my largest work, so it's 12 pieces.
Wow.
All framed individually, but it's 3 sets of quadriptych ledger drawings. So each set has 4 individually framed pieces, but they're meant to remain together.
Gotcha.
And for this show specifically, it'll be, stacked.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm excited for people to see that. And that's, I think, that's where I've evolved to and developed to, is like refining these shapes, playing with more color. In printmaking, it was pretty primary and secondary, but now I've jumped into tints, tones, and shades of all of these colors. I'm using the grayscale a lot more, which has been fun to play with that. And yeah, that's some of the areas that I've really dived deeper into that I think are important to my studio practice.
Yeah. And when you go from like a single piece to a multi-panel piece, how do you feel like that changes the nature of, if you're calling it a multi-panel piece, like how does that change the nature of your relationship to a piece versus a single sort of panel,
It feels more important to me. It feels more like this is one of the more meaningful pieces. Because in printmaking, there's additions, and I'm working with an addition of one image. And so when I'm working with ledger drawings, I decide to pick one shape, and then I work with that shape. I change the interior, color wise, all of that. And so you'll see multiples of a drawing, whereas the large pieces, those are, really one of a kind. Like they're the only one that I'm doing of that, and then I'm moving on to a much larger piece. And so they feel just more important to what I'm creating and leaving behind. Hopefully in the long run, I'm always thinking about the long run and where my work is. In museums is always the best, I think. And that way my work can live on and other people can view it in the future.
Yeah. It's funny. I was listening to some of the past episodes. You were talking about, that transition to ledger and like wanting to keep your number ones from the screen print editions, and how like thinking about, these as one of a kind pieces was like, oh, I guess I can't keep my number one for the original, and transitioning into that.
Yeah, no, that was really challenging at first, and that's why I came up with the idea of I should just stick to one image when I'm working on a series of works, and try to keep one from that. If
Gotcha.
I can.
Yeah.
Which I've done, but not every series. Some are in places that I'm happy for them to be there.
Yeah. And you really, I think, have come to this place of like real depth in your practice, like just the iterative nature of it. It's like you have this sort of solid core of an idea that relates to the Blackfeet Nation, that relates to the painted lodges, that relates to the stories, that relates to you personally and your interests and what kind of art you like. And there's like this real heart, this real solid core. And it's like you've got all of these like branches coming off of it, and they all connect and they all relate. And it's just like you're going through all of these different iterations of this idea in all the ways that are very interesting. And I just love how much depth you're going into this core heart of your practice.
Yeah, I recently, I brought it with me too, my notebook. I recently wrote down things, like I'm always doing this too, and it always changes. where I write down what I feel my work means to me at the moment. And like, what am I actually pulling from in terms of my core, my foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And so, of course, my home, coming from the Piikani Nation of Montana, like, which includes so many things: family, culture, painted lodges. Like, home and being Piikani will always be a part of my work. Like, that's innate. And then going to IAIA, being a student, taking classes, that's where I actually started to think about taking art serious and wanting to become an artist. And so that's where I started to take on art classes. And that's where I made the decision to be like, okay, I want to do this after graduating in 2016 full time. And so post II, that's what I'm in right now. And it's just like very flourishing, evolving, developing stage of my life. And even post pandemic is even more of a focus there. That really changed my way of thinking. And so those three areas are like big building blocks, and they all have even more roots underneath them that can branch out into so many things, especially for my home. But yeah, I like to, so for home, I just have, the land, the cosmos, the lakes, rivers, creeks, community. And then for II, it was classes, instructors, museum studies, contemporary indigenous art, student, pop art, sci-fi. I was really into those genres at the time. Printmaking, photography, Blackfoot art, history, painted lodges. That really made me dive deeper into my own culture's art history. Mm-hmm. And I was already interested in painted lodges, but trying to become an artist, I was like, well, how do I become an artist? Take classes, listen to your instructor, I guess. So I've always been someone who's interested in books that tell you how to be, and so I how to be an artist, basically. So I collected all these books that are like emerging artist tips and like what to do, how to plan for the future. And that's what I like to do. So I've kind of learned to be an artist on my own. I don't have the same traditional background as some of my peers that I went to school with, who went there to be an artist and they grew up doing art prior to all of that. I basically started there, and I'm a little behind, but I've also was like really wanted to take it serious. So I just did everything so serious. I was like, I took everything about being an artist very serious. And I think that's really helped me.
It shows.
Yeah.
It really does, because I think that like, if anybody asks, for pieces of advice, like, and especially in terms of like how to find your voice or something, it's just make work.
Yeah.
Just like go hard, make a bunch of crap. Like, just keep going, make it, and you'll find it'll come out. Mm-hmm. It's there, and I think you've just really busted your ass. It's great.
I found, like most people probably, but I just been so open-minded about it and found my own way to be an artist and what feels good. And I've tried to experience all of it in terms of galleries, museums, art markets, small holiday markets to large, Santa Fe Indian market type things. And so, yeah, I've done it all. And now I'm just at a point where I'm trying to like gravitate towards things that feel they'll help me in the long run and things I want to stick with. So in the gallery and the museum shows, that's something that's been a lot more amped up lately.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I guess you're not tired of it yet.
No. And I will say, though, just to add a little more to the museum side of things, I've always wanted to be in that realm of, if you get to that point of your career, I think that feels really great. And I've always wanted to be in that. Like, I always think of my CV. My CV is like for Piikani Blackfoot people, they would have their painted lodges, like these war stories on them, or these hides, like winter counts and success stories. And they would add to them, especially the winter count, they would add something significant each year that happened as a glyph, as a image, pictorial type image that would represent what happened that year. It could be something tragic too. Most of the time it was something successful for either that individual or the community. So I think of my CV like that a lot, where these are all my successes, these are all my accolades, this is where I'm at in my career, and this is my these are all my like coup stories. Coup stories are more for warriors that were going to war and all of that, but this is more like of a artistic coup stories, educational coup stories, which has its own levels to climb, just like in military or the war, there's certain levels. So I think of that as more of contemporary modern way of viewing my CV and comparing it to historical practices, artistic practices of mostly men. And so, yeah, that's what I feel like I've really added a lot of museum collections. The most recent one, which they just acquired, is the Toledo Museum of Art. They acquired my quadriptych ledger drawing I did for Santa Fe Indian Market Best of Show last year. And then the year before that, I did a triptych ledger drawing. And these are all framed in one frame, so they're my pretty large works. And the Ammon Carter Museum of American Art purchased that one. So definitely Indian Market brings in curators from all over, collectors, like these people who are really interested in art and collecting it and sharing it with other people. And so Indian Market has added a lot to my career in terms of networking, meeting people. And prior to being in Santa Fe Indian Market, I was always doing the IAIA Student Alumni Market, which is held the same time. And I always did really good there. But once I got into Indian Market, that was a whole new exposure. It was like so many people, and really put me on a more national stage, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. You have the site biennial coming up. Can you share a little bit about how that came about?
Yeah. So the site show, they reached out to me, the curator, last year, and started off with a studio visit, just showing them what I'm working on, what my focus is, and eventually led to them inviting me to be included in it. And they commissioned me for a new ledger series. It was originally, that really grew organically. It was like smaller. It was even more than 12 pieces. It was like 15 to 18, but smaller. And then eventually it changed into what it is now, being 3 sets, these 3 sets of 4 drawings. And it's really inspired by the Transcendental Painting Group. And so Cecilia, who's the curator for the 12th International, she sent out all of these pamphlets, to each artist to look at in terms of New Mexico history, people here, characters, history back as far as it's known in terms of like White Sands, some of those first footprints. She tried to really capture and learn about New Mexico as much as possible, and shared that information with us and asked us to go through them and see what we gravitate towards. And there were some themes that were starting to pop up, and energy was one of them, which was divided into 2 types of energy, spiritualism and more nuclear, And so I gravitated towards spiritualism and the TPG group, the Transcendental Painting Group. And so they really inspired this piece. Just their outlook on art, on color, on, they were into mysticisms and Theosophical Society and clairvoyant people. So that really was interesting to me to learn about and dive deeper into, leading down the rabbit hole and learning about all of these topics in different ways. And they were a short-lived group from the 1940s, late 30s, 40s, I believe, and they only lasted for a little bit because then the war happened, and that really broke them up, and they didn't come back together after that, and some of their members died, and so, but very still important group of New Mexico and what they were doing and what they were creating, very like these aura and type scenes, but geometric scenes. Organic. It was just really neat so I'm excited for people to see this. I tried to emulate some of that, and then also, of course, adding my own interests in what I feel is I think elevating. That's what I thought about their work. It was very elevating, spiritual, to the cosmos, to the heavens. So I tried to create work that has this directional movement to it. And the bottom set is darker colors, shades. The middle set is like mid-tone, these sort of gray colors, though still colors, different colors. And then the top one is all light colors. And so hopefully people will see that. Each set, I chose primary colors. So the light one there's yellow in all 4 of them that connects them, unifies them. The middle one, it's blues in all one piece, but then all the colors are different. So they're all individual looking. And then the bottom one, there's red, and there's this red color in all 4 that connects them, but then all the other colors are different. So hopefully, people can see that. Everyone I've shown so far, they've just really liked the work, and it's really, the scale wise, it's really different. And it was a way for me to think differently. I didn't think it was going to be 3 sets of 4. I thought it was just going to be 12, but then I was like, well, this is a large piece to keep together and go move on after the show closes. And so I thought of, well, let me break it up into 4s and have 3. That way, when it's over, it can be broke up if it needs to be. So I chose one title for all of them, and then I chose a subtitle for each set. Mm-hmm. So that's how I kept it all connected to being a commission for this site show. After this, it can be broken up, and of course,
the fact that you were drawn to the Theosophical Society makes complete sense to me, because they were also so mathematical.
Yes.
And your work is so mathematical. I'm just listening to you during this interview. I'm like, that is such a tendency within you, is the numbers and
numbers.
Numbers
are a big thing. And just thinking about numbers, traditionally from my own nation, 4 is a special number, and that's one of my favorites. 7, 12, and 14. Mm-hmm. And so those are numbers I've always been drawn to. But other numbers too. And like 1, 2, and 3 for sure are numbers I like. And I have my little sister, I was just home recently, and she showed me this book about horoscopes. And I'm a Capricorn, and it showed like what your favorite number is, and it said my favorite number is 5. Which is probably one of my least. So I was like, oh, that's really interesting to know that. But I like to work in 5s. So like 10, 20, 25, 50, those are numbers that I'm drawn to afterwards. But
yeah, and they really saw a connection between spiritualism and certain numbers. And I mean, that even lives on today, and kind of modern, new age movements, even though they were a short-lived group, it's like their ripples are still in a lot of
number and sound, they're when combined, they're pretty powerful, even with imagery. The more numbers you add on, such as the suite of 8, and for this one 12 or 4 and 4 and 4, so. And I thought about that too.
Magic in that.
Because it's the 12th International, and I did 12 works. I made that connection just recently. I was like, oh, I didn't realize I did 12, for the 12th International. But like I said, for my tribe, the 4, there'll be 4 songs, and then they'll move on to something else, and then there'll be 4 dances, and then they'll move on, or there'll be 7 people or 14 people. So it's really interesting, and that's part of the reason why I like numbers, and probably why I connected to these different groups of people throughout time. Math being I work in a very gridded way. I'm using numbers a lot, even when I'm measuring out in the studio, like where is the symbol shape going to be placed, and all of them have to be placed in that same exact order. So I'm making sure when I start a series, that all of them are the same, and I really like that order.
Yeah, I mean, even looking at your notebook, right?
Yeah,
it when you opened it up and I saw how organized it was in there, and everything is listed and numbered, and I thought, here's the mind of not just an artist, but an architect, like that is building structures.
And architecture is really cool. That's something in terms of something that inspires me, just seeing out in your everyday life. Architecture for sure. Like Santa Fe's architecture, so edgy, and the shadows it creates. That type of stuff is very inspirational. But I've heard I did a show in Dillon, Montana at the University of Montana Northern, and that work was inspired by landscapes. But somebody pointed out that it seems like architectural blueprint, images. And so that was really cool to hear that type of comment. I really like to hear what people think of the work because it is so abstract in nature. And sometimes I'm playing with abstraction that's based on land and the cosmos, which has been always a big part of my work. But now I'm playing with abstraction that is just based on non-objective, like this is just what I want to see. This is just what I want to create and see what happens. And it's more intuitive, that approach. So abstraction, I'm playing with both types of abstractions.
Yeah, I mean, I think about, stories as our way of making order out of mystery, and like you're so methodical in your practice and your work, and it's like you're creating a new kind of order, out of your life and your stories and your culture, and like kind of creating this just like a new book in a way, and I think that it's even interesting the way that like, ledger is a way of like creating order of something, whether it's like your inventory or, your sales or like, what clients, things like that. It was like this sort of, Western way of creating order of a business usually, I guess.
Yes.
And like you're overlaying this other way of looking of ordering stories and meaning on top of it, which I think is a cool kind of relationship.
Yeah, no. Ledger history, just to quickly share with the people listening, because it's something new I'm doing. It started in the 1860s. That's some of the earliest ledger drawings I know of. It's usually traditional ledger art is very much based on war scenes, warfare, coup stories, ceremonial scenes, courtship scenes, horses, warriors on horses, medicine lodges, all of these things that we came from, and that was part of our life before colonization and settlers encroaching on our lands. And so once that happened, because prior to ledger paper having access to these accounting documents, notebook paper, just whatever it was at that time, we were doing this documentation on hides, and that's how we were documenting stories and recording stories on hides, on lodges, pictographs, petroglyphs. All of these symbols meant something to someone, and that's what we were doing before. And so drawing and the act of drawing in North America has been around for tens of thousands of years, and that's what ledger art, to me, ledger art is just this new form coming from these older ways that the bison was nearly eradicated. We were forced on reservations. None of this was accessible to us anymore. And this was the new thing that was accessible, and crayons and colored pencils and pencils, all of that. That's where it changed. So it's very much about a pivotal point in our history where it changed, and not for the best, for the worst, I would say. Because from that point on, we were forced on the reservations. The bison were nearly gone. Just a lot of hardships. Can't access hunting grounds. So much restrictions, and so many promises that continually were broken because all of the people in charge, whether it was the government or territories, Montana, the state, or Indian agents, they just 99% of the time they were crooks. They were not in favor, even though they said so. So to me, ledger drawing is this really changing environment happening in front of our eyes, and these people are still trying to capture that and document that, even though that's no longer the lifestyle. And it's lived on throughout those times. And so my father, Terrence Gardapi, he started ledger drawing with a number of other artists, native indigenous artists, trying to revive it. And so it seems today that it's not just Great Plains artists, because that's some of the original drawings are just Great Plains artists that were incarcerated, and they got access to this in prison. But now it's like all indigenous nations of North America that are working with ledger drawing and still documenting their own tribes' histories, their own personal histories. And I think I know I'm doing that too, but in a more symbolism, like geometric symbolism. This symbolizes something, or it could even be just a shape that is meant to inspire new thoughts or new symbolism. That's what happens to me when I view my art. So I really gravitated towards ledger drawing after I started to work with it. My dad always wanted me to do it, but he gave me my first papers before the pandemic, and they're just so precious. They're historic documents coming from a museum studies background. It just felt like this is something you should take care of, and so I just was never ready to draw on them until the pandemic happened, and then I was sort of forced into that because I had no more access to print shops. But I really really loved working with these old documents and having a little more control over color, placement, all of that. And it's just been, and I've tried to think, well, I was already doing this in printmaking, documenting and recording histories. I've always been inspired by my tribe's history and culture and just where we are at in terms of the current times. And so that's kind of what I brought into this in terms of, I was like, well, I want to continue to record my own experiences and create new shapes and really creating the unseen. I think I've really looked at that a lot and thinking about, artists have the ability to create the unknown and unseen. And what I was seeing in Montana definitely was not what I really wanted to see. But those painted lodges, every time I would see those set up sometime throughout the year, I was like, I want to continue this on. And so I feel my work is definitely in that continuum path of my ancestors viewed and interpreted the world around us in geometric ways. They symbolize the mountain as a triangle. They symbolize stars and the moon and sun as discs. I was like, I want to continue that way of thinking. And so I'm symbolizing my experiences and things I see in two-dimensional form on drawings.
Yeah.
That was a lot of information.
That's great. No,
I think it's really interesting that the thing that propelled you into ledger drawing was an event out of your control, and it took you from how you were doing art into a new way of art. And how you, like, just before that you were talking about the origins of ledger art.
Yes.
And in way, that is exactly kind of the same story,
right?
And how this gets continued, and how these constraints out of our control propel us into these new directions.
Yeah, a word that comes to mind is resourcefulness.
Yes.
And being
resilience.
resilience.
Yes.
Exactly. And being faced with obstacles or challenges, but being a human, you're trying to jump in survival mode and figure that out quickly as possible. How do I get over this obstacle, and how do I keep going? And so, like you said, the ledger drawing, that just allowed them to keep that going. They're documenting. And thankfully we do have access to hides now, but most of the, this ledger medium has lived on. And so I'm part of that at this other end. I'm still using colored pencils just like the original ones too. And I really like the texture that colored pencils can create and just the aesthetic that it has. But yeah, my work is just, I think I'm very much doing the same thing, is recording and documenting these experiences or symbols that come from something. Like I could talk about something on my work. It'll probably lead something back to my culture, like something that I could talk even more about and go further into. Or color, color is, I use my color wheel a lot, and I'm selecting color based on that. It used to just be like the painted lodge colors, which is primary, green, black, and white. But now I'm using the full color wheel and spectrum. And really using the color wheel to help me determine a lot of that. But yeah, ledger drawing is just so much fun. I've really enjoyed working with it, and there's just so much history to it because it's a document that the people who were doing ledger in the late 1800s, and there's a lot of good written stuff on Fort Marion, I believe it is, and the different incarcerated warriors that were there. A lot of, I think, Kiowa and Ute and Cheyenne. So some of the early ledger drawings I've seen are from those tribes specifically, but you could see how all the Great Plains people definitely had a similar style, and because we're all from the same region, just like the coastal tribes and nations, they're very similar. So yeah, there's these similarities you can see, and the paper they had access to at that time was current. So the paper I'm using is like older, and so that's a little difference too in terms of the earlier drawings and what they had access to versus us now. Now people are hunting out this old paper, and my dad has found so much of it over time, and I've been either gifted, some people have dropped off here and at other galleries paper that they're getting rid of, and then I've traded with some people who have had paper like that. So people are always asking me that, like, where do you get the paper? And so it's, various locations. I've tried to look for it on my own, and it's so hard. I can't find it. It's usually just, I don't know, luck that it falls into your hands. Everything's about timing, the right timing.
Are there specific things you look for when you're hunting your paper?
Not really. I mean, as long as it's just older documents, I'm interested in the old paper. And then when I'm actually working with the paper, I'm more interested in the dates. And so what was like going on during those times, that's what I usually tell people is that's something that leads me to, when I'm titling, I'll usually write down that date somewhere or what was going, like 1903. Just anything that comes to mind, I'm writing down. But the dates are always that stick out. I like to think about history and learn about history, and so I'll dive into that a little more in terms of my own tribe, though, but also what was going on in Montana specifically.
Love that. Yeah,
it's cool. When we were talking about the CV and like all the wonderful success you had lately, and like thinking about all of these things, these experiences that we have, and in our careers and ecosystems and things. If you can kind of imaginatively look at yourself 50 years from now and looking back, what would you say like success means to you? Like out of, you have all these accomplishments, but like what, if you were to like put them all together in the pot, what is success to you?
That's a good question. Of course, exhibiting, that's always been a goal of mine. Is to exhibit. And when I was starting out, I was always trying to think, like, shoot for the stars, I guess, and want to show at all the Whitney or, places that we were learning about that contemporary artists were showing at. But as I got more in tune with creating work and working with galleries, and the museums who have reached out to me, that has slowly gotten less important, and it's like, well, these are the people that are gravitating towards me, and this is who I want to work with.
Yeah.
And so those goals have changed for me, at least. I don't think I need to be in these places that I feel make or break an artist.
Yeah.
I'm just interested in creating work and working with people who I feel are good to work with, and I'm happy for people to reach out to me. I'm happy to be in a point in my career like that. And so 50 years from now, I hope I would, if I'm still around.
We all are still around.
I would hope to have, made a more national presence, I guess. I'm always so proud to represent my nation Piikani Nation, Blackfeet Nation, and the whole Blackfoot Confederacy. And so that's always been in the back of my mind, being an artist. The point was to share who we are and share part of our work with the world. And also just let them know that this way of thinking and creating, has been here in North America for thousands of years, tens of thousands of years. I always like to make that a point that, this has been here and I'm part of that, and we're all part of that experience because it's history and it's here, and there's all of this physical evidence of that, and archaeology, Blackfoot archaeology of Montana and Alberta goes back tens of thousands of years too. And so I've always been proud of coming from rich history like that. And I think that's part of my success too, is that I come from such a strong nation culture. Of course we have there's a lot of issues today, but in terms of who we are and historically and who we are today, there's so much rich history. So they're, very proud, come from a proud people.
Yeah.
And I think that has always influenced my work, that, cause even growing up, our sports, everything, that everyone always admired us and, thought we took everything so serious. Blackfoot people are very serious people. And so I think I'm like that of my people and my family, and my, we're very, once we say we're going to do something, we try to take it serious and do a very good job at it. And so those values, Blackfoot values, are part of me. And I think that, just helped me accelerate. I probably really accelerated past all my peers that I thought were so ahead of me. But one thing I've always tried to do is keep things changing and not stick to, so I that's why I work in series. I'm trying to keep changing and evolving these shapes that feel even more energized. That's what I'm a goal in the work, is creating work that feels alive, that feels energized. And those painted lodge symbols and paintings, all those paintings, once they're transferred to a couple, they become activated and they become alive. And so it's not just this painting anymore. It's this bundle, this ceremonial object for that family that needs to be treated as if it is alive, as if it's a baby. It needs to be fed, taken care of, nourished, all of that, treated with respect. So I've tried to look at my art, how people look at those painted lodges, because, it's such a elevated, higher way of looking at art and thinking about art's function. All of a sudden, that art mural, which looks like a mural, its function changes to something even more special. And so I've looked at religious art too, because religious art kind of has that same feeling in terms of chapels and what's on those panels, and how those are meant to be elevating for their religion, for their spiritualism. And for us, it was our lodges, and those were our chapels.
Yeah.
So those ways of thinking, I try to carry on with my own work, and those values and all of that.
Yeah. Cool.
It's a similar question I had early on. If you were to look back at who you were 2019, pre-pandemic, would you have anything you would want to say to yourself back then?
I think just everything I've done has kind of helped, good or bad, has helped lead me where I'm at.
Were there any anxieties or things, that you were chewing on that you could say, hey,
right,
it's going to be okay?
No, definitely things like that were, taking that leap of even being an artist, I think is really hard. And once the pandemic happened and I got laid off from my part-time job, that really made me feel uncertain. This uncertainty. to everything, and of course the pandemic happening, this global thing. So I think just knowing that things would be okay. I don't know. That's a good question. I'm not too sure like what I would say to myself back then. Just keep going for it, and trust your instincts, and take time though to. I feel like back then people say that, like, take time to rest and relax, but when you're trying to survive, it feels like you almost can't take time. So I've tried to, my dad, he's really into markets. That's what he does. He travels everywhere for markets, and I wish he could take time off. And so I've really, and he hasn't gone the gallery route so much. Sometimes he'll, dip his toes into that, but not really. And so I've gone that complete opposite route of him, where I am more focused on galleries, and because there is this there's certain help or assistance galleries can afford to an artist, and that can allow them to maybe slow down a little more and focus on the work rather than traveling or something like that. But so that's one route I've gone compared to my dad. But now that I'm in this groove of really working and creating a safe place for me and Samantha, and trying to think about our future and security and all of that, I hope I can take time at this point in my career. That's what I would want to get to, is a point where I could be like these Art 21 video artists I watch that have the luxury to just sit in their studio and create and focus on studio practice. At this point, I've always just been focused on shows, and I'm creating work for that show. I'm not really in the studio working on ideas. Like, if there's an idea I want to focus on, I'll gear it towards that show coming up, and that's where I explore something. But it would be nice to take time to just have a few months, a season, 3 months of just doing whatever I want, reading whatever I want. I have so many books. I like to read. I like to collect books. There's some of them, I'm really into collecting books based on genres and interests of mine. And so my Blackfoot book collection is super large. Like, anything on Blackfoot people, all four of us, Piikani from Canada, Saakwaynaamah'kaa. I collect books on all of that. I collect books on op art, on these old artists that documented Blackfoot people, non-native people that were photographers, Edward Curtis, Walter McClintock, Roland Reed, Winold Rice, all these artists that came to my tribe back in the early day. I'm very much interested in that, and I've always wanted to create something based on those people. Like, these people came at a time and documented us, and so there's something about that I've always wanted to jump into, but I haven't. Carl Bodmer, he created some of the very first portraits, 1830s, 40s, of us. So yeah, I'd love to have more time to dive deeper into, is there a project that could come out of these early recorders? My uncle would call them, or they chronicled our lives. These chroniclers that came in, took pictures, documented us, recorded our stories, but didn't assist us in any way, didn't help us, didn't advocate for us. So I always think that's like the bittersweetness of all of those archival images that I'm so drawn to and feel are special when you learn about the actual history, the photographers, the people, the artists, the creatives. And yeah, it's really, there's so much dynamic to that history, and that's something I would want to dive into a little more. And I've been collecting Hudson Bay blankets for some reason. I don't know. I'm wanting to, and these are old, we use them in ceremonies. I think that's why I collected them. But I come across them all the time, like at antique stores, and I've seen artists use them in the past in installations, and I always thought it would be, I'm not sure what I would do. I don't even know if I would want to put it in a museum like that, or an exhibit like that. But those are just areas that I really wish I could dive deeper into and basically, kind of go on sabbatical. And hopefully that'll be soon.
It needs to go in your notebook.
Yes.
Write it down.
Write it down.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm getting close to that. You know,
Yeah.
I'm at a point where things are moving, and I'm refining that and cutting it down. And somebody told me though recently that, you know, just remember to try to take time for your practice, and make time to just do whatever you want in the studio. Just practice, you know, experience or experiment with something. Start a new body of work that you've been wanting to do, instead of just always taking on shows. And even if it's a nonprofit, you know, sometimes it can seem so great, but so that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to take that advice, trying to look at that advice. And I've heard this, you know, over the years, and I keep telling myself that. And so I feel like I am getting there. I'm slowly getting to this area where I'm narrowing it down, and just learned so much since 2019, since our first podcast, on how to be an artist right now. And since 2020, I've been a full-time artist. I just been doing this full-time now, and it's really amazing. Like, just crazy to think about where I'm at right now, and how many people I've worked with, and learning so much with that too, because everyone's different. Everyone has different personalities, and so, but I've always been somebody who I hope like just works well with other people, or like I'm very open-minded. I like to look at the cup half full rather than half empty. I'm a very optimistic person, and so has helped me probably.
Yeah. The soil was you were ripe, and the soil was ready for you.
Yeah.
And everything just took fast. Yeah.
No, 2025 has been just a crazy year. You know, like you said, I have had solo shows, art fairs. First solo show was Chapter New York, then here at Echo Mono. Then I did the Brooklyn Art Fair with you, Print Fair. Then the Independent Art Fair in New York City. And then earlier in the year, I was in a 2-person show at the Diane Rosenstein Gallery with Julian Stanzak. And he's an old, you know, no longer alive, but an old op artist that I had seen his work before, but I did not recognize the name when she first told me. So being next to a master artist with my work, that was really cool to see for me. And then different group shows like the Bates College Museum of Art, Exploding Native Inevitable. It's such a hard name, that one. That's a traveling group exhibition of indigenous artists, so I'm really happy to be in that. I'm in a group show right now at Museum of Indian Arts and Culture here in town. That's all the Goodman Fellows. So I received the Goodman Fellowship in 2016. So I have works up there right now. That show is on for a year, I believe. And then I feel like there's the Zimmerly show, Zimmerly Art Museum. Jean-Christophe C. Smith curated this show that I'm a part of, and there's like 90 indigenous artists.
Oh, that's a crazy list.
So those are some group shows that I'm a part of that I didn't have really. Well, some of them I have input in, and I send stuff, but others are like I'm in it, but they're using a work from someone else's collection. So that I think that's really interesting too for an artist, for me, to be in a point where they can actually pull from other collections now. Because I have like a very good handful of collections now with my work in them. So I'm super grateful for that. I think was a goal of mine, and I made, that feels like it's happened now, was to get my work in the museums, and either them acquiring them or me strategically donating.
Yeah.
So.
And site opens on the 27th?
June 27th, yes. So
we'll get this out before that.
Cool.
And anything you want to add? I'm about to take a right turn.
Do it.
So going back to kind of like the core of your practice,
yes.
A couple of times you've mentioned, I'll just say, I think it's really amazing that right now it feels like a lot of, and maybe it's just because I'm in a bubble, but a lot of these stereotypes about Native art are starting to really be challenged big time. And maybe it's just because I'm more aware of what contemporary Native artists are doing, but it feels like that. I don't know if you've experiencing that as well.
Yeah.
But it reminds me of a letter you've mentioned a few times that Oscar Howe wrote.
Yes.
I wonder if you would indulge me. I copied it. If you would read it.
Yeah, I could do that.
Because I think it's a really powerful letter. And I was looking at the date. It was like in the 50s or something. And I think it's so relevant.
It is. No, he's so great. Oscar Howe, Dakota artist.
So I copied the text there.
So this is, from the Philbrook Museum.
Yeah, so he was excluded from a show. Is that right?
Yeah, for his work not looking Indian enough.
Right.
And that's what they told him. And so I'll read the letter he wrote back. Is this it right here?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, I'll read it. So here it goes. Whoever said that my paintings are not in the traditional Indian style has poor knowledge of Indian art indeed. There is so much more to Indian art than pretty stylized pictures. There was also power and strength and individualism, emotional and intellectual insight in the old Indian paintings. Every bit in my paintings is a true studied fact of Indian paintings. Are we to be held back forever with one phase of Indian painting that is the most common way? We are to be herded like a bunch of sheep with no right for individualism, dictated as the Indian has always been, put on reservations and treated like a child, and only the white man knows what is best for him. Now, even in art, you little child do what we think is best for you, nothing different. While I am not going to stand for it, Indian art can compete with any art in the world, but not as a suppressed art. I see so much of the mismanagement and treatment of my people. It makes me cry inside to look at these poor people. My father died there about 3 years ago in a little shack. My 2 brothers still living there in shacks. Never enough to eat, never enough clothing, treated as second-class citizens. This is one of the reasons I have tried to keep the fine ways and culture of my forefathers alive. But one could easily turn to become a social protest painter. I only hope the art world will not be one more contributor to holding us in chains. Oscar Howe. Such a great piece. And it's just like, that's how I feel about my own work, is that it's just pushing these boundaries and not trying to be, restrained and told, like, this is how to do art, because that has happened throughout history so much, even here in Santa Fe with the Dorothy Dunn School, where they were doing the Bambi style. They really encouraged that as what Indian art is. And when I first came across Oscar Howe's work and just seeing how geometric, even some would call it cubism, but I read somewhere that he didn't like his work being referred to as cubism, but more inspired by his own culture and the spider web stories for them. And I could totally see the spider web shapes in his work after I read that. And I just thought that was such an impressive, powerful letter he wrote back to them and put them in their place. And, who are you to tell us what Indian art is? And it almost seems when I first moved to Santa Fe, it kind of felt like that, where it seems like there was a very specific way of doing art. Even when you walk around Indian Market, everything looks the same. So I've always wanted to see something different. And that's why I'm creating what I am, is just because it's very different, but it's still very connected to where I'm from and grounded in history, culture, and experience. But Oscar Howe, I was in a show last year, a group show. They had a exhibit of his work and then invited in artists from different generations to show. And so I showed some work there, and
that's great.
That was really cool. They even thought of me reaching out about that. So there's a lot of famous old Native artists that I've been drawn to. Oscar Howe, Alan Hauser, his more abstract works, Evolution out on IAIA's campus in the dance circle. That's one of my favorite pieces. Every time I see it, it's just so cool and edgy, and I'll always be drawn to that work. Like when I first came to school there, I was like, what is this? I've never seen anything so freaking cool, and this was made by a native. That's just what I thought when I first seen it and came. to school there, and then within my own community, there's some artists that Neil Parsons, he did a lot of real big geometric works. Sometimes they reminded me of like Parfletch, but other times they were just these big shapes. That's sort of what I'm working with, and so to learn about that earlier generation, that those were the ones that were the first ones, like, because Oscar Howe and Alan Hauser, they're from a much earlier time, the 50s, 60s. And then George Morrison, he's somebody who I was also starting to learn about. But now today, when I first came to II, it was always about these artists that were just before that too. So I'm trying to think of like Rebecca Belmore, Bob Houses, these artists of that were very in the scene when I came. And now that I'm done, and once I started working at Mokna Collections and being exposed to that, even then it seemed still there wasn't quite the shift that it felt like now there feels like all of these artists are in the scene, and there's a lot more younger ones that have basically opened the door. Nicholas Glennon, Chinupa, Hanks Galuger, those are some artists that I've always looked up to at their work and their sort of work ethics. So
it's really incredible to see. It's really inspiring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I'm really happy for Indigenous artists to be on this more national and international stage. And, the Venice Biennale with Jeffrey Gibson, like, it just seems like there's a lot more people coming out. But those are the names we're starting to hear of all the time now.
Yeah.
So I hope that...
Fresh crop. Let's get the fresh crop out there.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that there will be, I feel I'm part of that. I feel there's other artists, that we're all on the same level of taking our career serious and wanting to be in these areas that are not native centric. And because our work, just like Oscar Howe's letter said, we can compete against any art in the world. And I feel that is, 110% true. So I'm really happy to be part of this next wave of people that, we're on people's radars, but, we're still below these other guys that are above us.
Not just compete, but be liberators.
Yeah.
Have the work liberate the world.
Yes.
Which is the power of art. It ties us to our past and to our history and where we came from, but it's also just it opens us to places we didn't even realize were shut down.
Totally. Yeah. And I think this work, one of my titles for a show I had recently was called Visual Reaffirmation. And that's what my work is doing for me in terms of Piikani art forms, and it's reaffirming some of these older forms. But also another goal is to just get the work out into these new spaces and not really forcing my way into the door, but the ones who are opening the doors. I'm wanting to go that route. And so, that's where it's kind of been. And I'm really happy for all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, make sure you all go out and see the Site Biennial opening June 27th. You've got work here at the gallery at Echomana. You've got work up at Good Luck Gallery in Kalispell right now. You've got work up at the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture. There's probably 5 others that I'm forgetting right now.
And I'll be at the Santa Fe Indian Market.
Indian Market in August. Yeah.
So I got.
And then we're gonna work on another show in 2027.
Yes.
Well, 2026 we're looking at a group show.
Yes.
So
and a print.
Yeah. So all kinds of stuff happening.
All kinds of stuff. Yes.
Thank you so much for doing this again.
Thank you, Frank and Kara, for having me.
Thank you.
I'm so happy I could share. Kind of give an update of what's going on in my world. So
maybe we'll do it again before 6 years is up.
Yes. Sounds good.
Cool.